Welcome one and welcome all to the PFN Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Tate. You can find me over at Derek Tate NFL over on X. That is the one and only Kyle Soppe. You can find him over at Kyle Soppe PFN over on X. And of course, we're joined by the one and only Theo Ash. You can find him over at Theo Ash NFL over on X, formerly known as Twitter. Guys, we're going to be talking week 2 rankings on this episode. Maybe some tweaks. It's still very early in the season, so do we overreact? Did we get some answers to the test? We're going to discuss that here in just a moment. But of course, got to start off on the right foot. Soppe, it's waiver wire Wednesday. Did you land any of the guys that you were aiming to add in any of your leagues? Because it's always weird to see the one person that kind of blows their entire free agent budget on week number 1 on some kind of crazy ad. So did you fall victim to that, or did you get your guys?
Yeah, no, I fell victim to that in that I didn't really land much of anything in free agency. Isaiah Likely, a popular ad, obviously, but I think he's going to be like tight end 9 to 12, and to me, that's not worthy of a big spend. Jordan Mason, obviously a big ad. We think he's going to start this week, had the big week last week, but I went running back heavy in draft, so I'm not overly tied to needing a running back at this moment, and I don't think he's going to be an October, November kind of asset. So I stayed in the weeds. That's kind of how I approached the first month of the season anyway.
Theo, how'd you do in your leagues across week number 1? Any? I know you mentioned you had a couple drafts in the final week leading up to the NFL season. And speaking of the waiver wire, did you get it? I mean, did you already have Isaiah Likely on all your teams? I know you talked about him in the preseason, so I'm imagining he's pretty much rostered in all your leagues.
Yeah, I had him in a few, so he wasn't a huge target for me. The 32-person fantasy league is the one that I devote the most of my time to, and the waivers there are an absolute mess. I did get Jermichael Hasty, and I got I can't even remember the other guy that I got. It was nobody, but I do know that Tyler Johnson had 19 bids in that league, and several of the bids were everybody's entire free agent budget. So I stayed out of it because the week 1, I think, overreactions to anybody who was worth anything on the waiver wire were pretty intense. I'll wait until there's an injury a little bit later and start to use my money later instead of blowing it all on Tyler Johnson and things like that. So, yeah, I had Likely. I had most of the guys I wanted and kind of stayed the course.
The strategy is always a bit relative to your league size, your starting requirements, how deep your bench is. 32 teams certainly makes it a little bit dry, which makes spending the entire budget on Tyler Johnson something that is, again, reasonable. Maybe not. Anyway,
I don't know.
Yeah, I still don't see it. But anyway, so if you have not yet done so, of course, subscribe, click the like button, drop us a review, however you digest your podcast. We're going to go ahead and jump into our week 2 rankings discussion. But real quick, we did get a little bit of breaking news, Soppe, out of Miami. And that is Raheem Mostert, who picked up a chest injury against the Jacksonville Jaguars, has been ruled out on a short week when they're set to face off against the Buffalo Bills in week 1. Devon Achane is a game time decision. We saw some things from Jeff Wilson Jr. The dynamic rookie Jalen Wright was inactive for week number 1. So if you're speaking of the waiver wire, who are you trying to target between Jeff Wilson Jr. and Jalen Wright? Do you think they're both worth an ad, and do you feel comfortable starting either of them this Thursday night?
Yeah, I think both are pretty clearly worth an ad because you want to be tethered to this offense. I mean, it is that simple. We don't need to overcomplicate it here. Mostert being out is a shame for Mostert managers, but that's what happens. He misses games. He's an older running back. So I'm holding him. I don't think there's any actionable there. This is a good reminder. Thursday night football, make sure you see who's active and then slide him up your roster, put him in the running back spot, not the flex spot. You don't want to burn that and limit your decisions come Sunday. So strategically, that's the direction I'm going. I do prefer Wright over Wilson, just more upside. I think if they're getting similar touch count, Wilson might have a slight edge in scoring equity, but you're talking the profile of Wright is going to make him more valuable on a per touch basis. So he's flirting with my top 30 right now. And if we get an update on HN, I could see a world in which he pushes inside that top 24.
So, Theo, I'll throw it over to you, too, because, I mean, you were high on this Miami offense, really, as a whole, entering this upcoming year. And, I mean, Devon Achane delivered. I mean, he was heavily involved in the passing game. And, of course, the rushing efficiency was a bit disappointing, but maybe the ankle injury / a Jacksonville front that looked pretty formidable maybe provides a little bit more context. But with Achane banged up and probably at less than 100%, if he even goes against Buffalo. Who would you prefer to add, and would you feel comfortable starting even Jalen Wright? Let's just say in a hypothetical situation that Achane is a no-go, would you even feel comfortable rolling Jalen Wright in there in week number 2?
Not at the moment, I don't think. I just feel like a 5th-round rookie. It's tough to see the field this early. Maybe it's obvious as soon as he touches the ball that they give him the rest of the game. But I think there's also a world like last week. Jeff Wilson Jr. was the guy who was active and Wright was inactive. And Wilson picked up over 5 yards a carry. So we don't know for sure if Achane won't go. So I think that you're going to want Wilson over Wright. I think that it's a safer bet.
I'm with you there. I didn't have on my bingo card Jeff Wilson Jr. leading the Miami Dolphins in rushing yards in week number 1. But both of these players are certainly worth an add. I'm with you guys. I feel more comfortable starting Wilson if you're in a pinch at running back on Thursday Night Football. But let's go ahead and transition to week number 2. Because Soppe, like you said, prior to the season starting, everybody's right. Prior to week 1, but now we got to kind of reprocess the information. We got some concerning performances, both good, and then we had some outstanding performances, and we're going to run those down and what happened in week 1 and how it's impacting the week 2 rankings. I'll start with Kirk Cousins, who finished week number 1 as the QB 31. Not good. Not very good at all. Soppe, his Atlanta Falcons debut, maybe you expect a little bit of rust. Maybe this Pittsburgh Steelers secondary with Joey Porter Jr. is a little bit better than we thought entering the upcoming season. But certainly a disappointing performance. Cousins' first game back from an Achilles injury. Now he's got the Philadelphia Eagles in week number 2, which we saw Jordan Love tune up and carve up after a slow start to that contest. So what are your thoughts on Kirk Cousins entering week 2?
Yeah, the matchup doesn't scare me, but everything else about him does. I mean, you mentioned a veteran coming off an Achilles tear like that. That's obviously a problem in a new system. Yeah, I think part of this was the Pittsburgh defense, and that was a theme on our other show with, it's like, oh, is Baker Mayfield the greatest thing since sliced bread? Maybe Washington might just be that bad. I think part of that's at play and that Pittsburgh is that good, but Kirk Cousins, you're talking the 5th lowest ADOT last week. That's the part that scares me because this Atlanta team, they've got guys that can make plays. Kyle Pitts is always up there in depth of target at the position. Drake London, we know he can make plays. They brought in Darnell Mooney. That's kind of what he does. Bijan Robinson, I get that there's going to be some short targets in that respect, but the fact that he wasn't willing to challenge down the field, they got bottled up, that I don't think he's 100% healthy. There's a lot of moving pieces here. He was on the fringes of viable as it is, so he's going to really need to do a lot. I think he can improve this week, but that doesn't put him on fantasy radars.
Soppe, just for maybe a discussion, where do you have him in the rankings? Because right now I have him at quarterback 17, and against that Philadelphia secondary that still had some issues. I thought they maybe showed some signs of life on the back end. I liked what I saw from Quinyon Mitchell in his debut. It wasn't a great performance, but I thought it was encouraging. So where do you have Kirk Cousins in your ranks at this current moment?
He's quarterback 19 for me. He's not that much different than Daniel Jones, who finds himself in a great matchup, and obviously he's Daniel Jones. So, I mean, there's that part of it. But, yeah, I'm not starting him unless it's a 2-quarterback league, and even then, I don't think you're making up significant ground by doing so.
That's the answer that we all are asking ourselves. What is worse, the Washington secondary or just Daniel Jones as a quarterback?
I'm fascinated. I am fascinated.
We're gonna get an answer in week number 2. And speaking of week 2, what a debut! We've talked about it on the Monday episode, which you have not yet checked out. Go ahead and subscribe. Click the bell so you get notified every single time we drop a new bit of video content here on the channel. But Theo, J.K. Dobbins, we went on and on about his week 1 performance. He was the running back 4 overall in fantasy football. Yet, he's going up against Carolina, which that offense looks like they're going to have issues putting up points at all, or maybe throughout the majority of this upcoming season. And of course, they gave up a pretty darn big performance to Alvin Kamara, and even Jamal Williams found the end zone on the ground in week number 1 in that Saints blowout of the Panthers. So in a potentially favorable game script, what are your thoughts on J.K. Dobbins entering week number 2?
Start him. Start him against the Panthers. I mean, the Panthers' main problem wasn't Bryce Young. It wasn't their offensive line. It wasn't their receivers. It was their front four. They were getting blown off the ball every single snap. I mean, it was just liabilities across the board, except for Derek Brown, and I think he's out now. It's going to be awful. It's going to be awful. I think Harbaugh is going to run it directly down their throats. I think it's going to work. And I just like J.K. Dobbins. Watching him run, it does remind me a little bit of like Saquon moving in slow motion. Really, he has none of the home run hitting ability, but the way he kind of moves and navigates behind the line of scrimmage, it does kind of remind me a little bit of what Barkley can do. He's been a dynamic back before. Had a good week one. Against tougher matchups, I think the interior of the Chargers line will be just a bit too bad to really get things going. It wasn't a crazy efficient day until J.K. Dobbins took over in the fourth quarter. Zion Johnson, Bradley Bozeman in the middle of that defense had some struggles getting the run game going. But I don't think that's going to be a problem against the Panthers. They don't have Fuaga and Penning are especially good run blockers, I'd say. So I don't know if it'll go quite as crazy as what the Saints did, but I still think that this Chargers offensive line with Alt and Slater is good enough to exploit a really, really weak run defense. I think you want to start whatever running back you have going up against the Panthers all year.
Last year, the Panthers were amongst the worst units against opposing running backs in fantasy throughout the 2023 season, and losing Derek Brown for the year is not going to help.
It's not good.
Regard.
It's not good.
I can't think of a worse start for the Carolina Panthers, really. It's been just brutal. And you mentioned how dominant the Saints were running the football last week. Alvin Kamara had 15 carries. You want to know what his yards before contact per attempt was? It was 4.2. That's bonkers.
Dude, you're staying on schedule before you even get touched. It's not good.
And we were talking, you guys, we talked about some of Kamara's, efficiency issues. I mean, it doesn't matter when you're playing against the Carolina Panthers this upcoming throughout, at least in the early portions of the 2024 season, at least what we saw in week number one. Soppe, I have J.K. Dobbins at running back 12. Is that too low?
Wow. Yeah, no, that's too high. I get everything here, and I've got him just outside I've got him at 21. Like, I get where we're going here. If this is going to be a ground and pound game, does that not feel more like Gus Edwards? Like, I guess we're squabbling over nothing here. You're starting him regardless. He's inside the top 24. Like, that's a play. But where do you think he ranked in expected points last week? Like, based on where his carries came on the field, what we would have expected the average NFL running back to give us.
Soppe, I don't know. You can tell me, though. I'm very
28th, Derek. Ezekiel Elliott was expected to get more points based on where his touches came than J.K. Dobbins. I'm not dismissing what Dobbins did. It was great. We love to see it. And you love to see a player like that finally healthy and on the field. I'm not sure how long that lasts, so that's a longer discussion. But he was running as hot as the sun, and he had 13 touches. I just don't know what the upside there is if he's not going to score, because we think Gus Edwards is going to get those valuable carries. And we've seen the fact that J.K. Dobbins can't run away from like a garbage truck. My man, he hit the open field, but he could not separate once he got rolling. So if we're not going to pencil in a touchdown and we're not going to give him 15 touches, I'm sorry. The math in me has a hard way of getting him inside the top 12 like you got him.
Well, the matchup tells me, and the game script that I'm projecting tells me that I think that he's going to see probably north of, would you be surprised if he sees north of 10 carries, maybe between 10 to 15 in this contest? Because
if he went over 15 touches, I'd be surprised.
Look, I thought the offensive snaps, though. I mean, and you're saying this is a Gus Edwards game. Dobbins was on the field 59% of the time in week number one. I'm feeling like Dobbins is the play here. But you have him in your top 24, so it makes sense, right? We're seeing the same thing. I'm just probably a little bit more bullish on how terrible this Panthers defense is against opposing rushing attacks. Theo, thoughts?
Where do you have Gus Edwards ranked?
He's 34. So it's not like I'm not projecting a 3 touchdown game out of him. I don't think this backfield's going to be all that advantageous. This spot, I understand. You're going against Carolina. I got nothing against you. And if there's ever a spot to invest here, I think J.K. if he goes bonkers like what you're saying, there's no easier sell high option on Monday morning than Dobbins in that spot. They've got a couple tough matchups, a bye coming up. It could get ugly in a hurry, and we're not sure he can last. But yeah, I'm lower. I'll put my chest on that and say I'm lower than Derek Tate on J.K. Dobbins for week 2.
I don't hate the sell high strategy, but I do think he's going to have a good week 2.
That's fine. That's good.
I'd say let's sell high after week 2.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Let's move on to Ramondre Stevenson because speaking of the running back 4, which was Dobbins, look, Ramondre Stevenson was outstanding, Soppe. Running back 5 had a monster game against the Cincinnati Bengals. Obviously, that game script, it was a very low-scoring contest, and Cincinnati was playing from behind, which actually played into Stevenson's hands. But let's not take anything away from Stevenson here, who finished as a top 5 back in week number 1. So what are your thoughts on Ramondre Stevenson? Obviously, the matchup against the Seattle Seahawks, a little bit different vibe maybe than the Cincinnati Bengals. I thought the Seahawks run defense looked far better than they did last season against Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin. But what are your thoughts, Stevenson facing off against the Seahawks defense?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking over 34 minutes of possession, a positive game script, all that stuff. We don't doubt that Stevenson can be a talented player. I'm just doubting the situation. Gibson wasn't a factor at all, so you'd love to see that. He gets the high volume. All of that is great. I don't think any of it's projectable moving forward, though. I mean, I'm going to read to you their schedule. You tell me the next time you think New England has like multiple drives in a game where they're leading. I don't think they do it against Seattle. After Seattle, you get the Jets. Probably not leading for much of that game. Maybe tied, but not ahead for much of it. The 49ers, are they leading for any of that game?
No.
Okay. We'll go to the Dolphins. Are they going to be leading for any of that game?
Probably not. Probably not.
How about the Texans after that? Any part of that game? Do they have a lead at all?
No, Soppe.
Ramondre Stevenson right now is what J.K. Dobbins is going to be in like 72 hours. Like that, you need to move on from Stevenson because this is a terrible situation. Like you said, Seattle's run defense, fine. I'm more willing to sell on this preseason. I didn't want any part of the Patriots offense. That hasn't changed after one fluky win where they had the ball for 34 minutes and the Bengals. That's a whole different discussion with the Bengals. But if you can sell him at a top 20 price right now, how do you pass on that? I get starting him and wanting to ride it out because the high volume, all that good stuff in week 1 and wanting to see where it goes. I'm fine with starting him. Low end running back 2, decent flex play, but man, you are playing with fire.
I just see 28 total touches in week number 1. I get that the game script played a huge factor in that, Soppe, but the fact that Gibson was such a non-factor, man. I mean, he's going to be a high volume play, but at least he feels like a volume play that can pay off when given the opportunity. So do I think it's a sell high candidate? Yes, I do. Where do you have him in your ranks for week 2?
24 right now. He's behind Jordan Mason for me. We're assuming Christian McCaffrey sits. He's behind David Montgomery. He's behind your guy, J.K. Dobbins.
I've got him at 21. So, I mean, we're in that same range. I'm not buying the top 10 season or anything like that for Ramondre Stevenson, but it's an interesting debut and one that encourages me to make me think that he can be a low-end running back too this season. So we'll move on. Guys, the Raiders running game. A weird development. We had Zamir White as the running back 47, Theo. It wasn't pretty, and we saw Alexander Mattison score a touchdown. So the idea with even trusting Zamir White as a low-end running back 2 in your roster, in your starting roster, was the fact that we thought he was going to be the clear-cut number 1 option. And it looked like there was more work for Alexander Mattison than we expected, particularly in the passing game. 4 receptions for 43 yards and a score. So what are your thoughts on Zamir White entering week number 2?
He's not good. Did I not say this in the pre-draft process that I had no intention of drafting Zamir White and thought that he could get taken over? Yeah, man, he was my running back 37 before the season. Like, he's not that good.
You were too high.
I was too high. I was way too high on him. No, he fumbled. He is not really a home run hitter. He's not someone who really catches passes. That was a sweet move by Madison on the sideline to make those people miss and keep going. This is an ugly offense as well. Gardner Minshew, not looking very good, throwing the ball into the dirt and fumbling backwards in the first game. Antonio Pierce having no idea how to manage the game and give them a chance to win by punting on fourth down with the game on the line. Just don't like any part of this offense. Kind of like the Patriots, right? It's like, what is even the upside here? He's not going to plunge in for a lot of touchdowns, I feel like. So yeah, man, I would rather take Madison than White, and I would not want to take Madison. So it's not good.
Soppe, I've got Zamir White at running back 39. Am I crazy for having him outside of the top 35? I'm not high on him at all. I'm hating on him, Soppe. I'm hating on him.
Not at all. And that's fine. I've got him at running back 32, so I'm a little higher than you, but it's nothing more than cheap volume and hoping that maybe he somehow falls into the end zone, but he does nothing well. Like he does, his scouting report sounds a lot like what we said for Madison last year, so I don't think Madison's any great shakes either. This is going to get uglier before it gets pretty.
Speaking of pretty, though, Jameson Williams had a pretty nice debut in 2024. He looked like the wide receiver one, although he's not. It's Amon-Ra St. Brown. Everybody calm down. But it was a very encouraging debut for Jameson Williams. And this week, Soppe, he's going up against a Tampa Bay Buccaneers secondary that is decimated by injury. Zion McCollum suffered a concussion. He may not be able to go. Bryce Hall, who is another depth piece in that secondary, he was carted off with an air cast on, so it looks like he's not going to be available. So we're talking, Tyke Smith. We're talking, rookies and guys that are like cornerback 3, cornerback 4 on the depth chart. And by the way, all-pro safety Antoine Winfield Jr. is also out. So oh boy, my Buccaneers are in shambles on the back end, which is not good when you're facing off against Jameson Williams. What are your thoughts on him entering week 2?
Yeah, career high snap count, all that stuff. Last week, every bit of his explosion last week looked legit to me. And we said it in the offseason that it was coming. His ADP was far too low. In the early summer, it inched forward a little bit, but I don't think it ever really caught up with his upside. You joked about him being the wide receiver 1. Yeah, well, let's not go crazy here, but Jameson Williams is going to be a problem on a consistent basis, and playing alongside a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown helps him. Teams are going to be more worried about St. Brown than they are Williams, and that's going to open things up downfield. You mentioned the Buccaneers. Their defense is a problem. We know that. But if their offense is anywhere near as good as what we saw, that's just going to put them in a scoring environment too. If this game's played in the 50s, Jameson Williams might well repeat what he did on Sunday night this week. He's a top 30 guy for me.
We got him at 32. I'm right there thinking that he's going to have himself a very nice week against this banged up Buccaneers secondary. I think that they probably overcorrect and make it a point to try to get the ball to Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I also don't see the Buccaneers, in particular with Winfield out, having any sort of answer for Sam Laporta. I think Laporta and St. Brown are going to go nuts. But I do still think the way to attack this Buccaneers defense, Theo, is on the back end, with particular how banged up they are. And I don't think they're going to be able to generate pressure against Jared Goff in this contest. So I see a big day for Goff, Laporta, St. Brown, and I do think that a Jameson Williams gets a big play or two against the secondary.
Yeah, the Lions are always good for like a 40-43 type game every season. It feels like this might be one of those. I definitely feel like Jameson Williams is a very worthy start. He creates downfield separation very easily. Now, him and Goff haven't always been able to connect, even when he's open downfield. I do think that Williams kind of he can struggle maybe to track the ball sometimes, and Goff as a deep ball thrower maybe isn't the greatest, but against this Tampa Bay secondary, you're going to have so many opportunities that you can hit a couple of those. I mean, I think about the deep shot they hit last week on that double move. There was so much separation on an older, maybe washed corner, Tre'Davious White, that he was able to kind of stop and catch it underhand, right? So if you have weaker corners, he can just fly right by them and be the only one on screen. So I think that with Winfield out, I can envision that reality certainly for the
just keep Jamison Williams away from Jamel Dean, because Jamel Dean plays strictly at right corner. So I mean, there's not a whole lot of formation versatility as far as moving Jamel Dean around that secondary. So I think they're going to be Ben Johnson's going to be able to go hunting in this matchup. Yes. But I will touch on the Buccaneers because that is a team that we want to talk about. Soppe, obviously big debut for Baker Mayfield. The Washington secondary, we've already talked about it. We probably think that they could be amongst, if not the worst secondary in the entire NFL. I see this one being a high-scoring track affair. Again, the way that you want to attack the Lions defense, too, is on the back end. And we saw that with Kyren Williams averaging under 3 yards per carry against this unit up front. Of course, they were a little bit banged up along the offensive line, but the Rams ran nothing but 11 personnel, and the Buccaneers ran it at the fourth highest rate at 82% in week number 1. So that looks like their base set. I think that, and they threw for over 300 yards, did Matthew Stafford and company, without Puka Nacua for the vast majority of this contest. I think Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and guess who led the Buccaneers in snaps in week number 1? It was Jalen McMillan. So I think all three of these guys, and I expect Baker Mayfield to try to keep up with Jared Goff in this offense that I think is going to torch the Buccaneers on the back end. Soppe, call me crazy. I mean, maybe I'm a little lower on Rachaad White, but Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Jalen McMillan all feel like guys that have, wide receiver 2 type upside in week 2.
Yeah, I'll leave the spoiler out, but I do have one of them in my DFS lineup. We'll go over that tomorrow. I think this game's a good stacking option for there. Baker Mayfield inside my top 15 at the quarterback position. The lack of rushing, the need to repeat what he did last week. I'm not getting over my skis with him and plugging him in over like a Brock Purdy I'm keeping in, especially without Christian McCaffrey, things like that. I'll take Jared Goff over Baker in this game. But, man, I don't think it's impossible to think that he can put on tape this week what he did last week or something close to it. I was impressed last week.
I've got Goff at quarterback 7. I've got Baker Mayfield at quarterback 12. I think this is going to be a high-scoring contest, and the way to attack both of these defenses is through the air. So I think it could be a very high-scoring game there at Ford Field. So, and speaking of real quick, we'll touch on Terry McLaurin because wide receiver 80 in week number 1. And that's not good considering all the things that we've already talked about how weak this secondary, how banged up they were. And it was still a really rough outing for Terry McLaurin. Now they're going up against the New York Giants. I think they're going to be able to put more pressure on Jaden Daniels. What are your thoughts, Theo, on Terry McLaurin, his week 1 dud? And does it get any better with them taking vertical shots down the football field? Because I think that's kind of the path to success for this Washington Commanders passing offense.
Yeah, well, one connection from Jaden Daniels changes everything from Terry McLaurin in the last game. He was running open down the field for, I thought, a touchdown, and Jaden Daniels just missed him. I am a bit concerned, though, because the Washington Commanders had the lowest percent of their production go to wide receivers last week. Jaden Daniels had the best debut, but it was also very unambitious, I feel like. Just check down to Brian Robinson, get it to the tight end, something like that. But if they want to win games and not just put up EPA numbers while playing from behind, they're gonna have to get McLaurin involved. So it's in their best interest to throw it to him. He's their best guy. I do think that Daniels has been a very good deep ball thrower over the course of his career. He missed the one in week 1, but I think he could just as easily hit it. And I think that there's going to be plenty of opportunities for McLaurin down the field this season. I don't know. I think, what if he catches 2 of them? What if he catches 3 of them? I think that it is possible for him to rebound against a bad Giants team. I think that I'm cautiously optimistic about them connecting on one of those next week and doing better.
Yeah, no, I hear the missed shot down the football field, Theo, and I thought that's actually one of the things that Jaden Daniels does well is put the ball outside the numbers vertically, and it's unfortunate that he missed that one deep to Terry McLaurin. So, Soppe, I have him at wide receiver 31. Are we close there with Terry McLaurin?
Yeah, I'm at 27. The 5.28 at just didn't sit right with me from Daniels in his debut. I think we get that to rubber band back a little bit. You guys would know better than me. You're better with this tape stuff. But it seems like he's looking real quick and giving up real quick. And if that's going to be the problem, I don't know how we see too many deep shots because unless you have Jamison Williams, you can't get downfield that fast. Terry McLaurin is capable of making plays, and maybe that comes with time. I'm still cautiously optimistic, kind of like Theo, and that Jaden Daniels, the gift that keeps on giving with him in terms of athleticism, picking up first downs, things like that, will eventually put McLaurin in a spot to succeed. But this is more of a matchup play for me right now than it is anything I saw in week one.
Speaking of week one, though, we got to talk about Christian McCaffrey because he suffered that calf strain. I think it was back on August 8th was when it was first reported. It was reported as minor and cautionary, keeping him out and resting him. And then he's inactive in week number 1. And we see Jordan Mason absolutely go bonkers against the New York Jets defense to the tune of 147 rushing yards and a rushing score. Soppe, we got to talk about Christian McCaffrey. We don't want to have that conversation. It looks like there's a strong chance, a real possibility that he's going to be unavailable week 2 against the Minnesota Vikings. So how do you want to try to approach ranking and deploying this San Francisco offense without the best running back in the NFL potentially for week number 2?
Yeah, Schefter mentioned it on the broadcast Monday night that he already didn't think McCaffrey was going to play this week, which to me, if you're getting signs like that, after we didn't have any signs leading into Monday Night Football that he'd be inactive, a short week makes it unlikely. So I'm approaching this week as if he's not going to play. Jordan Mason inside my top 24. He's a viable running back. I don't think we're going to get every week going to be, top 5 running back like he was last week, but he's pretty clearly the guy. He's going to be featured in a significant way. The matchup isn't that bad against Minnesota. This team doesn't go on bye until week 9. So, if McCaffrey's going to have to heal on the fly here, I think they're going to be cautious with him. Jordan Mason, he was worth your while on the waiver wire. Even when McCaffrey's back, I don't think you're going to get 97% usage or whatever he was at last year. That's a worry. I don't think there's going to be a standalone value situation for Mason when CMC's back. But until then, you're starting him. You're starting him without much of a question.
I've got Mason inside my top 10 for week 2 if McCaffrey's unavailable. I mean, Soppe, I think that Brian Flores' aggressive defense is going to potentially have some issues because Daniel Jones couldn't pay it off last week. I think Brock Purdy and Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle and the rest of the 49ers offense is going to be able to punish a blitz-heavy defense there in Minnesota in week number 2, which means they just got to get inside the 10 or the 5, and no team does it much better than the 49ers as far as generating scoring opportunities, which to me still feels that Mason's going to have a nice touchdown upside with the usage that we saw on Monday night against the Jets. So I think that those things combine for a top 10 play in week number 2 if McCaffrey is unavailable. So speaking of unavailable, I don't know why I keep using that segue. I'll find something else, guys. But anyway, Jordan Love, unavailable for week number 2. Malik Willis looks like he's getting the start against the Indianapolis Colts. Yikes. So can we play any Green Bay Packer without Jordan Love under center? Theo, I will throw it to you first because I think that we have the same concerns about Malik Willis, but I am curious what your thoughts are on this Packers offense from a fantasy lens with Willis under center.
I think there are 2 guys worth a start here, and that's Josh Jacobs and Jaden Reed, kind of. I think that the Josh Jacobs panic levels are lower for me. I think that even though he had a really bad first half, you shouldn't be completely writing him off. The Packers rushing offense was still extremely effective overall in that Eagles game. They were picking up 7.8 yards per rush. They had 163 yards on designed runs. That was the 5th most in the league. They had 0.37 EPA per play. That was the best mark in football. Jacobs was very elusive. He was breaking tackles. Even in the first half, he was breaking tackles, and then they were gang tackling him, and then he broke some in the second. The Packers had 5 explosive rushes in week 1. That was the best mark in the league. I really think that with Jordan Love out, they could lean on Jacobs, and I think it's possible that he finds success against this Colts front that just allowed 500 yards to Joe Mixon, something like that. So, yeah, I think that if you're putting Josh Jacobs on your bench, I think that that's a little bit silly. And then Jaden Reed as well. They can get him involved underneath, and he can break off long runs. He doesn't need much of a space to go crazy. So, even though Malik Willis is, in my opinion, pretty terrible, I think in your flex spot after the week that those two had week 1 and just the pathway to carries that Jacobs has and to catch passes, he's not a bad pass catcher either. I would start both of them in my flex spot.
Soppe, I'm in lockstep here with Theo. I know that we have the Josh Jacobs, James Cook bet, which is not looking great for me with Jordan Love out of the lineup. And I know that he had a rough first half, but on 16 carries, he still averaged 2.6 yards after contact per attempt. So there was a little bit of juice there in the second half and a little bit of creativity, more than just what was blocked. And the Colts did give up a lot of rushing yards to the Houston Texans. But the thing is, when it comes to Malik Willis, is he going to be able to provide enough juice through the air to not face 8-man fronts on first and second down consistently in this contest? But I do believe that Jacobs is going to have the volume this week in a matchup that I think still he could be productive in. And Jaden Reed, if there's one player in the passing attack, Soppe, that you can get manufactured touches to, I do think that it is Jaden Reed in the slot and potentially in kind of like the screen game and even some jet sweeps here and there, because they do hand it to Jaden Reed every now and then. What are your thoughts on this entire Packers offense? Do you think are you willing to start both of those options in week 2?
Yeah, this is going to shock you. I don't have much Jacobs on my roster, so I'm not making that decision. But yes, he's a starter for me. He's a fringe top 20 guy. The matchup is there. Over the last 11 months, the Colts give up the 8th most yards to running backs before contact, and that was the problem for Jacobs in week 1. 100% of every single one of his yards before contact came on those 2 big carries. Otherwise, nothing for the other carries. That's a long-term concern. It's not so much a concern for this matchup, but if they're not respecting Willis in the least, and you got 9 guys piling in that box, then I think there's a low floor here for Jacobs, but I am playing him. Jaden Reed, he's outside my top 35. I'm not playing him if I don't have to. The wide receiver position is deep enough. You go that deep down the rankings, you've got Rashid Shaheed, you've got both Jaguar guys. There's options that you can play over Reed if you're not comfortable with Willis, and I don't blame you if you want to see it for a week before doing it. So you're not obligated to play Reed. I think you could do far worse. Like you said, the manufactured touches, the touchdown rush last week. There's ways to get elite talent the ball. In week 2, though, I'm going to sit him for right now.
Okay. So rookie receivers, though, we got to touch on these guys before we wrap up this episode. Soppe, Marvin Harrison Jr., 1 catch, 4 yards. Not good. No. Objectively not good. Not good. So what are your thoughts on, because I thought Kyler Murray looked good. I didn't think Kyler Murray looked inept or anything of that nature. They actually had a chance to win that football game for sure on the road at Buffalo. So they're taking on the Los Angeles Rams. What are your thoughts and where are you ranking Marvin Harrison, and what is your kind of expectation and outlook for him in week number 2?
I'm going back to the well. I'm going back to the well without much question. It's going to be the same. And I don't think Neighbors was necessarily great. He wasn't bad. He wasn't great. I've got both inside my top 20 this week, and I'm not thinking twice about it. You don't overthink things like this. So over the last 20 years, top 10 pick that's a receiver. Jamar Chase is the only one that's gone over 75 receiving yards in his debut. This is kind of how this happens. I wasn't expecting 4 yards. I took the under 65.5, though, over at DraftKings. But no, if you drafted Marvin Harrison where you had to get him inside the top 20 this year, you were betting on talent. We didn't know what he was going to offer at the NFL level. And to be frank, we still don't. But he's the alpha in this offense. I don't think this offense is going to function quite the same way it did last week. Like you said, they still put points on the board. Kyler Murray can move the ball up and down the field. Marvin Harrison, if you drafted him, he deserves to be locked in your lineup. He gets more than a week leash for me.
I'm going to put your feet to the fire, though, here. Marvin Harrison Jr. or Jalen Waddle in week 2?
12 and 13 for me. I got Harrison 12, Waddle 13.
About Debo or Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Yeah, I'm down on Debo this year, not this week. He's inside my top 10 because he got 8 carries last week. It'd been almost a full year since he had gotten 5 in a game. He's a pseudo running back in a receiver's body. Debo over both those guys for me.
Oh, okay. Drake London or Marvin Harrison, 2 guys with terrible debuts, but we expect better days ahead. Final question on Marvin Harrison.
I'll do you one better. I'll go Neighbors over London. I've got Harrison, Neighbors, London. I'm worried about London. I'm worried about that Cousins situation right now. The matchup's fine. He's still a top 24 guy for me, but I'd prefer both rookies.
So, and that brings us to Neighbors, which I do want to touch on real quick, Theo, because we saw Daniel Jones do Daniel Jones things. It was a nice touchdown pass to Andrew Van Ginkel, who was wearing the opposite uniform. And, but we did see, some encouraging usage from Malik Neighbors. 7 targets, 5 receptions, 66 yards. Felt like there was a little bit more meat on the bone. But I think we got a glimpse at how opposing defenses are going to try to attack this New York Giants offense, because Malik Neighbors is the feature player. No team ran brackets at a higher rate than the Minnesota Vikings in week number 1 at 5.9% of their defensive snaps. And guess who they were bracketing? Malik Neighbors. So is this a problem that we're going to continue to see? And are you concerned about it enough to bump Neighbors down the board a little bit against this Washington secondary? Or is the Washington secondary so bad that you're just going to roll the dice on a talent like Neighbors and hope he can pop one of his big ones against a leaky secondary?
The Washington secondary is so bad that I'm betting on Neighbors and hoping he can pop one against the leaky secondary. I might rank Neighbors above Marvin Harrison this week. I was a little bit concerned about what MHJ showed. I think it reminded me almost a little bit of Kyle Pitts. When I was watching the Cardinals tape, they were very run heavy, and I thought it was not a bad thing to be run heavy. The Bills play too high. They play a lot of nickel. It makes sense to keep the ball on the ground, but the Cardinals are so overzealous with it. They're like, okay, you're going to do that. They didn't have a wide receiver on the field for one of their first down snaps. They had 3 tight ends, 2 running backs. I think that's what their identity at their core is. They want to get James Conner the ball. They want to run the football. They want to be tough. And when Marvin Harrison Jr. was running routes, they were very deep, like posts, goes, corners. And then it would open up space underneath for guys like Dortch, especially Trey McBride. It did kind of feel like what I was seeing from Kyle Pitts with his long routes and then opening things up for Jonnu Smith underneath. The production not coming in kind of the bunches that you'd expect a big, tall, contested catch weapon like that. I think they got to let Marvin Harrison Jr. use his physicality more running routes instead of treating him like he's Marquez Valdez-Scantling. More slants, more digs, more outbreakers to run through some guys instead of over the top of everybody against the too high. I think that Petzing is a good OC. It worked. They put up 28 points. It worked to some extent. The second half wasn't as good. 8 of those points or 7 of those points was a kick return. So I don't know. I'm a little bit gun shy about Marvin Harrison Jr. after watching him function in this passing attack after week 1, but he's still a beast, and I think they can get it figured out. I don't think it's that hard of a fix. Just throw it to him more in the intermediate and short ranges.
Well, this week they're going to be facing off against the Rams defense that ran a ton of cover 3 and quarters in week number 1, and even in the quarter half and cover 6. So, I mean, we're going to see some space potentially for him to operate. But I like you said, I don't want to see him just an MVS cleared out type of guy. I want to see an expanded role, and I think we will. But I've got Malik Neighbors inside my top 10 for a second straight week. I'm doubling down, baby. Nothing feels greater than doubling down on Daniel Jones to start the NFL season. But speaking of doubling down, a lot of folks had some high expectations for the Chicago Bears, and Caleb Williams had a very, very rough pro debut, but it's a rookie's debut in the NFL, high expectations. And he had some missed throws. Keenan Allen actually probably could have had 3 touchdowns, Soppe. If you watch that game, there was some opportunities, definitely some plays left out there on the field. So how are we feeling about the matchup on Sunday Night Football with two receiver trios. Now, the Bears are down Rome Odunze. It looks like Odunze has been is dealing with an injury. He's going to be missed some time, which means it clears the way, in my opinion, for DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. So what are your thoughts on the receiver rooms for these two respective teams on Sunday Night Football?
What we saw from Caleb Williams in his debut, obviously far underachieved expectations. It's a high pedigree option. He came in, he didn't look good. We got our custom quarterback ranking, guys. Check it out. That post will be up on the site. Dead last. He was the only guy that got an F. Not ideal, but again, I'm not overreacting. I still think he's plenty capable of doing top overall pick kind of things. I mean, he funneled his targets to the guys he needed to. That's step one. That's something Jaden Daniels didn't do. So I'm moderately encouraged. I think he can have some success here. It's a wait and see for fantasy. You're not touching him in this spot. I don't blame you, but I'm starting Keenan Allen and I'm starting DJ Moore.
I've got them both as top 30 plays there in Chicago, but like more so in that wide receiver 2 range. They're both, between 20 and 30. So I'm not super high on either of these guys because I worry about what I did see from Caleb Williams in his debut. It's the Houston offense is the one that's a bit trickier because you had Stephon Diggs score 2 touchdowns, 6 receptions for 33 yards. But I still have Collins ranked as the wide receiver 13. I actually think that the Chicago secondary, Jalen Johnson is arguably the best cornerback in the NFL. And that is, you want to try to avoid those type of matchups if at all possible. So I kind of wonder, Theo, is this a week where you could see maybe a bigger or expanded role for someone like Tank Dell, who had a little bit of a quieter game, but certainly is capable of putting up some big numbers and some big plays when called into action?
Yeah, I think it's a week that I think that it is a week where certainly something will have to change with the Texans offense going up against a player like that and a secondary like that. You're going to want to keep the ball away from that right side where he's lined up. But I guess my thought would be if I was going up against the Bears and I was the Texans and I have this great secondary, I think I'd try to go right for the run game. I think this could be another big mix-in performance. You've got all these great players in the secondary, not just Jalen Johnson, but Tyreek Stevenson, I think, is really good. Kyler Gordon in the slot. The 2 safeties are pretty locked down as well. So even though Jalen Johnson is the best one, I don't really know exactly what receiver that is good for because everybody's good on the Texans offense and the Bears secondary. So like what matchup exactly is going to shine through over the course of the game? I'd probably keep it more with what I'm used to. Like, yeah, Nico Collins is probably going to be the top guy. Who knows how it'll go between Dell and Diggs. But if that's your problem and this secondary is great and the front 4 is kind of the weakness, I'm going with Mixon as the top fantasy performer from this offense this week. And with Caleb, I don't know. I should have said this with Daniels as well. The pressure, the offensive lines of these teams, I think it gets a little bit tough to bet on when you have a rookie that is in kind of an unviable situation that his offensive line creates. And that's exactly what was happening last week. Their center, Tevin Jenkins, the left guard, awful. I mean,
T'Vondre Sweat put it on them.
He killed them, and he's not even supposed to be that good of a pass rusher. And he was, I don't know what his win rate was, but it was crazy, right? So even number 91, I don't even know who that was, but he was like giving them buckets on the interior. And same thing with Jaden, like revisiting Jaden and Terry McLaurin, like Dexter Lawrence is probably going to make it so the situation in the pocket is just completely unviable. And that's what concerns me about the Bears this week is like, could Caleb drop back and just, again, have nothing really to do because there's someone right in his face? That's the thing that needs to get solved for the Bears before I'm betting on them in a huge way. So I think you still start Keenan Allen. I think you still start DJ Moore, but I'm a little worried. I'm a little bit lower on them.
So I'm Yeah, I'm definitely. That's why I don't have either of them inside my top 20 because I do have some protection concerns. I mean, Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson. I mean, I do think the Texans can get after the quarterback. Combine that with some of the issues that I saw from Caleb Williams in his debut as far as accuracy and inconsistencies and stuff of that nature. I want to see more before I elevate the even removed with no Romo Dunze before I make a strong, bold rankings prediction for either of these Bears pass catchers entering week number 2. That'll do it for this episode here on the PFN Fantasy Podcast. If you have not yet done so, subscribe, click the like button. Make sure you click the bell so you get notified every single time we drop a new bit of video content here on the Pro Football Network YouTube channel. And of course, however you digest your podcast, subscribe, leave us a review. We really appreciate all the love and support. If you have any questions or you want some more analysis based on everybody we talked about, you can find our written analysis over at profootballnetwork.com/fantasy for all of the things that you need to dominate your week 2 matchup in fantasy football. For Theo Ash and Kyle Soppe, I'm Derek Tate. And until next time, everybody, later, says a Tater.